approaching pull through, kind of having like the goal today is to get ideas down as coaches so that we have a consistent way of regressing, progressing, correcting technical errors, and making sure we know who like kind of needs the attention of like progressing and who needs the attention of regressing, because not everyone wants to PR their deadlift in the next 6 weeks. Some people just want to be healthier and move. So we need to figure out kind of how we're going to approach those individuals, because it is a very like higher risk movement. It's like going into how I kind of like to program for the strength stuff. So usually I like a heavy set, like a top set they call it. So I'll say like, okay, work up in 10 minutes to a top set at this RP at this rep range. And then once you do that, drop a percentage off that weight and work for more volume. So that gives them an exposure to a heavier set, teaches them to feel that weight, and then it gives them a good weight to kind of work at for the day. After that, it gives them a little bit more volume throughout the training day. And then usually too, this is where like the regressing and progressing comes in, is I like to program a primary accessory or a primary assistance movement. So that could look something like doing a deadlift and then doing an RDL, or doing a deficit deadlift, or doing a rack pull or something like that, which again, it's a lot of volume on people that don't need it, right? So it's designed to assist that main movement, but it will look like a ton of volume when you see it. So why would we use an RDL? Just, it's like a good base building movement. It's for the posterior chain. Deficits, that increased range of motion, again, is a base building movement. And then it also helps them improve their lockout strength. It could be used as well to improve their start, but at lockout, they're actually taking longer and they're having to travel greater range of motion as they reach the top. Same thing with block pulls. Block pulls might be in there. They also improve start strength because they have to create tension from a position where they don't have as much, transfer tension from a position where they don't have as much of that tension. It could also be used for the start though. Those are just kind of some of the little things that you'll see in the programming, kind of why we're doing it. So I usually like to go from longer range of motion to shorter range of motion. So something like an RDL to a deficit to a block pull as they get closer to, let's say, the pull through. That way they're, with that block pull, working at a greater intensity for the whole session. That's the idea behind it. Again, today, like I work in Amherstburg and you guys work all over the place. So you guys actually see more people than I do. So if I go through something today, like common mistakes I'm seeing, it doesn't mean that these are the only ones. If I'm missing something, let me know, because you guys honestly see more people than I do. So I just see like a very small majority of people in here. So starting off with our conventional deadlift, right? There's like one thing I see quite common with some of our lifters in here, and it's their hip position and their positioning off of the floor. So what you'll see with people a lot of the time is that they set their hips too low. And a lot of it comes down to setup. But if you look at this picture here, you'll see this position, which you'll never see most times in here. That one on the right, where their hips are very high. Most people aren't going to be there. Most people are going to be in that middle picture where their hips are too low. And then we're trying to get people to that last one on the left side. Okay, so these are all, they're doing two things and we're working on two things. We're working on getting optimal tension in the hamstring, and we're getting optimal lat tension, because those two are the things that are helping us maintain stability off of the floor. So if you look at this picture right here, hamstrings are going to be super tense. The lats are not. Picture in the middle. See how the hamstring will be on the back of that thigh right there. It'll be going up to the pelvis. It'll be very loose because they're not very stretched. So what you'll see with that person, it'll kind of look like this. So if you're off the floor and they're setting their hips too low, immediately you're going to see someone with their hips shoot up immediately. That's because their hamstrings are loose, and then their body's trying to self-organize to get into a better position to break the floor. So they're trying to gain that hamstring tension, and their lats aren't going to be able to be used effectively. That last one is where they're going to have the most tension in the hamstring, and they're going to have the most optimal, it's called length tension relationship of the lat. All that means is the actual contractile elements of their lats are in the most advantageous position to produce the most amount of force to stabilize their low back. That's what we want. It's that 90-degree bend of lat tension. That's where they're going to be strongest. That's where their hamstrings are going to be the most tight, and they're going to hold position while the quads break the floor. Then they create that movement. That kind of makes sense?
Would you say the shins look different in those positions?
100% too, yeah. The shin angle is going to be quite different. So if you see someone that has their hips too high, their shins are going to be pretty much vertical. If you see someone whose hips are too low, their shins are going to be more forward of the bar. And then somewhere they're going to have that, like that happy kind of medium in that position. And it's going to look different for every person because Joe's position is going to look different from mine. Same with Marcella, right? We all have different kind of leverages, but for the most part, you can expect to see either shoulders in front of the bars slightly. So someone with longer legs, like Joe or myself, our shoulders are going to be more forward of the bar, in front. Someone with like a Dan Paggio who's got shorter legs, a longer torso, his shoulder joint is going to probably be right over that bar in his start position. They're going to look reasonably, like the lats, the hips, they're going to look the same, but if you really like look down at the nitty-gritty of it, that will be kind of something you want to see.
Austin, you said that we don't often see people in the one the farthest to the right, but I find I do see people in that when they're like, but I find it's their mobility that lacks to get anything past that. So what would be the solution to that? You get the bar up off the ground?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Like if you put someone, so I got these things out here, like they're most underutilized sometimes in the gym. If you put someone up, it doesn't have to be crazy high, or it could be. That's going to get them into the starting position we want, and it's going to let them feel like they're still doing that movement pattern.
A hex bar would be an option for that as well.
One way to correct this that I find, and I've been trying to like hammer home with people in Amherstburg, is it's really just a setup. So we want to make sure some people just kind of set up, they do this thing, they like roll the bar, and they come back, and then they go. And you can't out-correct or out-cue a bad setup. You want to make sure that people are starting with the bar in the middle of their foot. So that bar is splitting their foot in two. You'll see most people start out a little bit too far here, or that's what I've been seeing a little bit. It's kind of out here instead of somewhere around here. And then how I would coach them through it, and I've been trying the last couple weeks to hone in on this a little bit more, is if you, it's better to see from the side where you guys are, if you set them up with the bar right in the middle of their foot, and then you basically tell them, okay, I want you to reach down with your arms straight, put your butt in the air, like you're doing a stiff-legged deadlift. If they don't let that bar move, and they push their shins towards the bar, as soon as their shins touch the bar, that's where you're gonna say stop. Don't let the bar move, squeeze your chest up, you're in your position. Might feel weird for people at the start, but I would be like, okay, reach down, butt in the air, okay, push your shins towards the bar, don't let the bar move. Okay, that's your position. Squeeze your chest up, push into the floor. Most times, for most individuals, that will kind of help them, and it comes down to that bar being centered right over the middle of the foot. Is that something you guys have been seeing at all, or is that? I think that's pretty good for that one. Yeah, good rule of thumb.
When you're talking about lengths of legs, I think maybe just to clarify, you're talking about in ratio to their own body. It's not like my legs versus Joe's legs.
Yes.
Like you mentioned your legs, like we're roughly the same height. Your legs are longer than mine, right? My
100%.
torso, I have a longer torso, so important for people to understand that that's in relation to you. You might say to somebody Marcella's stature, say like, you have long legs. And they're like, no, I don't, but they do. And like, you know, so very important you understand that.
100%, yeah. Everything's kind of like proportional, right? Like Joe's gonna have way longer legs, but we have reasonably similar proportions. And in this one here, like just a good rule of thumb. Usually you want to, for a conventional at least, you want to have the, have the hips set kind of in the highest position possible, while making sure the shins stay against the bar and that the hips are still lower than the actual shoulders. That's the spot you reasonably want to be at. Another little thing that we see, I think it's on there, not pulling the slack of the bar.
Yep, it's on there.
Yeah. So one of like the littlest things is some people start from just like a really like dry position where there's no actual tension created in the bar. So making sure that when we're cueing the setup, that the slack is getting pulled out of the bar, the arms are being cued to be as long as possible. That will help with positioning off the floor, and it will also just help with a smoother lockout as well. So like if you're here,
Hold on one sec.
if you're kind of here and you're in your set position, you reach down, your legs straight, push your shins towards the bar, squeeze the chest up, and then if you can hear the clip before you go. That idea of making the arms long is going to help people a little bit off the floor. I kind of hinted at it the other day too when you're in the class of people with their dynamic work too, not just gripping the bar and throwing it off the floor, making sure they're making their arms long, then pushing into the ground, so it's not as jerky of a pull. And then kind of leading into that, the push versus pull, it's like, we call it a pull because it's a deadlift off, it's a pull off the floor. For most people, I think emphasizing like that you're leg pressing the floor away rather than pulling the weight will lead to better positioning off the floor and better positioning at lockout. I'm gonna contrast the picture in a second. There's a really good video I took from Bart with the games, the Garage Gym Games. He was sumoing, and he set up basically like he was a conventional deadlifter, and he just basically pulled the weight off the floor, and then as he came to lock out, he had no leg drive. So whether it's conventional, whether it's sumo, trying to instill in people's head that it's a kind of a leg press with a high hip position off the floor usually helps. Is there anything you guys are seeing in classes with the conventional that we need to go over?
Yeah, I'd say stance would be a huge thing. And I do think that people like just, whether they just don't think about it as much as maybe we all do, that thing about leg drive is being like you're using your legs and your glutes. Those are huge muscles instead of just trying to pull it with your upper body, back, arms and whatever. So reminding people that like what the main movers, what muscles you should be using, I guess.
Yeah. I like it. And stance too, right? Stance width for conventional is gonna be, stance width for conventional is gonna be hip width, right? So hip width, again, is gonna be different for every individual because people have different sized hips. But if you can look at the person and say like, okay, this is your hip width, this is your hip width, that's gonna be the position where they're strongest because they're pushing into the floor, right? If my hips are out here, but I'm pushing from here, there's gonna be an energy leak because some of the energy is going here when they're trying to go into the hips. So that's kind of a good positioning. That is, actually I've seen that a little bit too. I'm gonna go into sumo, if there's anything for you guys. Sumo is, again, kind of like very like individualized, but a couple little things that are reasonably quick to fix. Sometimes people get very wide with sumo with their hands. So they go to set up and their hands are kind of out here and then their torso's quite forward. Amy Fenton does it a lot, and I've been trying to get her to get her hands a little bit more directly under her shoulders because kind of the idea with your conventional, you're gonna be out here because you have your legs in the way. With your sumo, the leverage is gonna help, or the leverage is the goal. So getting your arms directly under your shoulders will be a big help. The one thing that tried to find a picture that wasn't me, but me and Bart have very like similar proportions, same thing, long legs, short torso, longer arms, and we both lift sumo. And this was something I was trying to work on with him. So again, sumo is all about, it's a little bit more efficient because the distance that the hips have to travel is less. So if I'm conventional in here, the distance from my hips to the bar is the moment arm, right? That my hips have to overcome. Farther here than it is here, and that's the whole goal behind it, is to use that to your advantage. Bar is like a perfect example for this one, because in this pull, he pulls like it's a conventional deadlift, and a lot of our lifters do, and it will work for some people. Like Tony's a good example. Tony sets up like this, and it's perfect for his proportions. Someone like Bart, I think he'll benefit more from a wedge that's less like a conventional deadlift. So what I mean by that,
What's a wedge?
it's just basically your setup. So it's basically like how you're getting your positioning set before you initiate the pull. So for Bart, in this, if you see the video, he comes in to the bar, okay? He reaches down like this, and he pushes his shins forward. If you look at the picture, you can see his torso angle, right? You see how it's very, his torso is very much more horizontal than mine is in that picture. And then when I wedge down, my whole intent with this is to keep my hips as close to the bar as I can, break at my knees, and then spread the floor apart. My torso is a little bit more upright than his. Again, this won't work for everyone, but we have very similar proportions. And you can see in that picture, by him hinging and then pushing his shins towards the bar, his torso ends up more facing the ground, whereas mine ends up a little bit more upright, which you can see also his hips are farther back. So there's greater torque on the hip joint. Mine are a little bit closer, so it makes it a little bit more efficient. And that's kind of the idea behind it. So if you can cue people that have those kind of proportions and that are good sumo deadlifters to be closer to the bar with their hips in the horizontal space, so the hips are closer to break at the knees and then keep the arms down, it's gonna feel shorter for them with that lift. And then the other thing that comes into play there is when Bart lifts his weight, the video will show like he comes up and, actually wasn't good, but he comes up and his knees and his hips lock out at the same time. What we want to see is the knees lock out and the hips drive through at the top, so it's like a separate movement. Conventional, the knees and the hips lock out together. Because he's set up in that position, he pulled the weight off the floor kind of like this, and he locked his knees and hips out together rather than locking his knees out and then his hips out. That's one of the things you'll kind of see with some individuals.
Do you think that mostly has to, the differences between you and Bart are mobility?
I don't think so. I think a lot of it might be even like his intent.
Okay.
So I think sometimes I've been trying to get him on that a little bit more. Just cueing him instead of hinging down, say, get your hips as close to the bar, and I want you to not squat the weight, but think about it as more of like a little bit of a squat down when you break at the hips.
That's gonna be more of a quad dominant setup, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
100%. Yeah, you break the floor with your quads. That's why the knees extend first.
and then finish with the hips and that. So
yeah, that's pretty much it. You can see there that his hips are far back, his torso is more horizontal, and then it leads to more of a pull than a push at the start.
So for a sumo, would you like say to the majority of people, or just people who can, that would be more of a squat than a hinge?
I would say that majority of our members would benefit from more of a squat. Try to get them to make sure that they're not setting their hips too low in that position. Pretty much as soon as they can hook onto that bar, that's when you want to really stop them. But if you put it in their mind, like get your hips as close to the bar horizontally as possible. As soon as you can grab onto that bar, pull your chest up. That'll emphasize. You'll even hear like people will start to pull the socks out a little bit more efficiently because their torso is getting more upright.
Can you go over, like, let's say I'm your client and you're gonna show me a setup for a sumo. Can you go over, even just like maybe 3 big cues that you would give me to emphasize the things that you see most benefit most, I guess?
Yeah, so I would say most people, you want to be in the widest position with your feet as possible, maintaining your ankle over your knee, so those kind of stacked joints. So getting your feet as wide as possible, maintaining that stack of the knee and the ankle, and opening the hips up with the toes flared a little bit. The wider you are, the more flared your feet are going to be, because it would be really awkward to be like this. I like arms straight down, so I like to cue arms as far down as I can, pulling my shoulders down so I'm not shrugging up, making my arms as long as possible. And then again, that cue of hips as close to the bar as I can, chest relatively upright, hook onto the bar, and then hips through. Those would be the 3 that I really think about when I'm
Will you
going.
worry about like the foot position under the bar, like on a conventional, like where you said like it should be halfway?
Yeah.
For that, or?
Yeah, you can try and cue, like usually you're gonna be like a slight bit farther back than a conventional. So like you'll be like somewhere kind of here, you'll wedge down, and then you see how my knees drive forward, so that I get a little bit more like knee forward, which means I get a little bit more quad off of the floor, which is kind of what I want. Because if I went right here, then that bar starts to kind of roll. Yeah.
One thing I see, like we were talking about, what are we seeing in the gym is you're doing it in as the example, but is that they're getting just their fingers on it. It's like they're like trying to get their fingers rather than just sinking that bar right into the tang of their, whatever you'd call this, but the tang of your thumb. That's a gun word, but like yeah, stringing into the tang of the gun, right? Rather than like finger gripping it.
Yeah.
So getting in and securing that bar in their hands is one of the issues I'm seeing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty bad for that too, honestly. Like, it's probably why I can't grip
That's
the
why
bar
they're all
sometimes.
doing it.
Austin, Marcella, you're now in charge.
That's also scary.
And then,
Do you see him look at her when he's like, not everyone wants a PR, they're deadlifts.
See, that's,
All right, let's keep going here. We got the videos rolling.
and then a sumo and conventional, same thing. The one little thing we can work on is getting people to set their back, their upper back, and then engage their lats. So sumo conventional, same idea, getting people to create, it's called external rotation, but just literally just taking the bar, putting your biceps forward. So try and break that bar in half. We use that cue a lot, but trying to get people to feel more pressure on the pinky side of the finger rather than the thumb side is going to get people that positioning of the lats that we want, because that's where the force is being transferred. The force is right down here. This has got to hold, because if someone goes to pull and their shoulders get pulled into this protracted position, so they get pushed away, it's going to be very hard for them to lock out. We don't want them to retract, because that makes their arms shorter, which we don't want. So we don't want to see this, right? But we want to get them to break that bar, get their shoulders in the back pocket. That maintains their arms being long and gets them into that position where their lats can stabilize and there's no leak of energy. So one way you can get people to do that too is if you can think of it like a straight arm pull down. So if you're here and you're hinging, that movement, sometimes that's a good movement to prime the deadlift, but you did it with Marco the other day. Marco was set up here. Marcella was pulling the bar away from Marco, and she said, don't let me pull it away from you. So he had to pull the bar back. While she was pulling this way, he pulled the bar back, and you can feel right away the lat tension. That's what we kind of want to get people to feel. And it's the same idea was why we use those bands tied to the front sometimes, is to get that lat tension that we want. And then a little cue you can use for that is to tuck your armpits towards your pelvis. So armpits back towards those hips. That makes sense? Yeah. I feel like that's when we use a lot in here. Regression. So this one is like kind of the big one. When we do get in early February to the nitty